distinguished by its provocative title, Pics, Sex, and the Selfie. I think we're done. Our four speakers today range in disciplines and methodologies, but they all share an interest in the intersections of power mechanisms and photographic engagement, namely the practice of the selfie, its social media experience, and cultural significance. Now, I'm sure you're all well aware of this, but you can post questions and your comments to the speakers by using our hashtag A5 and TTW14. I'm Rotem Rozental. I'm the panel moderator, and I welcome you all, and thank you for joining us. So I think we'll get started with our first speaker for the day. Anne Burns is a PhD candidate at the Loughborough University School of Art. Her thesis examines how women's photographic self-representations are used on social media to enact practices of gender discipline. Prior to commencing her PhD, Anne was a photography demonstrator at the University of Salford and worked as a photographer at a high street portrait studio. Her talk today is titled, as you can see there, Disciplining the Duckface, Online Photographic Regulation as a Form of Social Control. Please join me in welcoming Anne Burns.
Right. Okay, so this is going to be a bit of a whistle-stop tour through my PhD findings. So I'm in my third year, so I'm sorry if this is a bit kind of content-heavy, and also sorry for the constant waving hands. I do discourse analysis, so it's a really kind of broad data set that I look at. So I look at memes, I look at forum conversations, I look at below-the-line comments, I look at everything. So you're going to sort of see a sort of mishmash of discussions, ways of talking about photography on the internet. So basically this paper presents a theory of social media discipline by arguing that the public discourse regarding women's photographic self-representation on the web acts to express and maintain social divisions in relation to cultural practice. Disapproval of others, such as younger generations, is typically expressed in relation to their tastes and habits. Using my two case studies, selfies and duckfaces, and I'm sure everyone knows what a duckface is. What
was that again?
So I analysed how instances of online microaggression reinforce social inequalities by perpetuating stereotypes, prejudices, and enabling the formation of hierarchies. So 3 aspects of discourse demonstrate the connection between photography and social organisation. The denigration of certain artistic practices, the transference of criticism onto the subject, and the regulation of both practice and subject together. So selfies inherit the associations of amateur photography, in which the essential ordinariness of the everyday subject matter, as well as the straightforward mode of capture, are identified in connection with the perceived creative poverty. Social theorist Pierre Bourdieu identifies the assumption that photographers become masters without ado, in which ease of practice is equated with worthlessness. Therefore, as a popular type of image that has been integrated without ado into the everyday lives of millions, selfies are arguably the ultimate devalued photograph. Besides this creative lack, the selfie is also criticised for its overabundance. Discussions of selfies that concentrate on their volume and problematise it as being overwhelming and an epidemic replicate wider criticisms and prejudices against mass culture, in which the differences between individuals are downplayed in favour of a generalised narrative of low creative value. After all, photographs of landscapes and food can be repetitive, numerous, and creatively uninspiring too, but they are not used in quite the same way within popular discourse to identify problematic subjects. The answer, I argue, lies in the way in which the discursive connection between creative practice and subjectivity has been particularly gendered, whereby attitudes towards women's personal photography are used to marginalise and devalue. One need only look at the examples of great selfies to notice that once they are taken by socially valued subjects, be they astronauts, film stars, or Leica owners, the practice itself is magically redeemed. So besides embodying poor aesthetic judgment,
Both the selfie and the duckface are used to make a number of assessments regarding the subject's character, ranging from narcissism and stupidity to low social engagement and debased sexuality. The discursive construction of the duckface and the selfie primarily identifies them as feminine practices. This association is a critical component of the marginalisation of such a popular practice, as it does not designate women as specialists within this field, but positions them as devalued subjects in contrast to men. Here, the connection between women, selfies, and a certain insecurity is made a consequence of nature. Through circulation and repetition, this association between the selfie and a devalued subjectivity is re-articulated, and in so doing attains a degree of legitimacy, whereby amateur photographs taken widely by women are regarded as obviously of low value. The following comments display some of the features of this assumed subjectivity in which selfie takers are characterised as immature fools and lazy, socially awkward and selfish. A dominant criticism of the selfie is that it is emblematic of insecurity and narcissism, characteristics which are then repeatedly associated with femininity. The narcissistic selfie taker therefore becomes a kind of truth, which can then be used by critics to distinguish themselves from the so-called self-obsessed hags who choose to share their images with others. In this way, photographic practice is used to support the marginalisation of certain subjects through the recycling and normalising of stereotypes. Turning to the duckface, we notice a variety of negative associations, the first of which relates to stupidity. The act of joking about stereotypes, as visible in these typologies of dumb girl posers, serves to reinforce them and turn them into a form of common knowledge. Here, certain forms of posturing, and presumably being dumb, are presented as an inevitable part of being a girl, and which photography renders especially visible. Criticism of the duckface most frequently takes the form of implying or stating outright that the expression is somehow unattractive. These examples demonstrate how the duckface is used to identify a subject who is unacceptable as either an alien, as having a perceived lack of clear gender identity, or as being mentally ill. This connection is emblematic of the distorted significance given to the transgressive actions of women, where being wrong is a consequence of merely being perceived to be doing something wrong. Disdain for the duckface also serves to enact distinction between women, separating the insecure deviants from their wiser and more confident betters. These images make direct comparisons, such as those two there, praising women who do not duckface and ridiculing those who do for their perceived failure and delusion. So comments on that image there in the middle make a distinction between two very similar manifestations of the duckface, where the difference between doing something right and doing something wrong can be very small. Apparently one is preferable to the other, I don't know. Minute differences that can equal a loss of status in this way foster a climate of uncertainty, anxiety and self-doubt. Confidence and relative worth are therefore both conceptualized in terms of the subject's capacity to internalize and embody normative gender ideals. The male heterosexual voice disdains the duckface as an obstacle to the fulfillment of male sexual desire by ruining a perfectly good set of boobs. Another example dramatically states that duck lips kill erections, and Morpheus's revelation positions women as lacking self-knowledge and requiring the guidance of a male advisor. Another image places a type of everyman figure in the context of a nightclub where women pose and gurn for the camera. This behaviour prompts his disdain, presumably because it excludes him. The irritated and horrified tone here underscores the function of women to service male desire, prioritising men and their needs over women's, and positioning women's behaviour in relation to numerous minute regulations. Besides being presented as unattractive, insecure and vain, subjects who take selfies or who do the duckface are also identified as cheap and not worthy of respect. In these comments, critics display a cognitive dissonance in which sexy pictures are both welcomed and act as the catalyst for disdain. Post-feminist rhetoric encourages the expression of a certain sexual confidence, such as via photographs, but here we see how this fits within a wider context which still divides women between the categories of tramp and wife material. In this comment, we again see the moral judgments made according to photographic practice, whereby selfie takers become symbolic of a much wider narrative about women's behaviour. Certain images are naturalised as indicating the subject's low status and chaotic femininity, along with drunkenness and public vomiting. The misdemeanours imagined here position certain young women as outside the bounds of acceptability. This exclusion renders them legitimate targets for abusive comments and identifies them as in need of regulation. When both the image and the subject are conceived of as devalued and requiring control, discipline can then be transferred from one to the other. Therefore, popular discourse about photography acts to naturalise regulation and permit criticism of certain subjects. The degree to which regulation is directed at the photographic practices of young people, and especially young women, demonstrates the socially divisive nature of such discourse. How we talk about photography, therefore, cannot be regarded as separate from how we talk about each other. A multiplicity of regulatory voices act to modify and limit the manner in which photographs are taken and shared, in the form of concerned advice, friendly tips, mockery, and outright prescription. Psychologist Pamela Rutledge's advice, top left corner, exemplifies the disciplinary force lying beneath the surface of benign guidance. This degree of intervention into the lives of others, based on a photographic practice, is permitted by the construction of selfies and selfie takers as problematic, embodying unrestrained excess and somehow inferior to others. The predominant rule regarding popular photography relates to the regularity with which images are shared, with criticism directed at those who share too many images. This notion of excess reflects judgments regarding eligibility for public visibility by identifying both image and subject as gratuitous and inferior. Here, this perception of too many becomes a justification for strict condemnation and verbal abuse, as well as directions to stop consuming valuable internet bandwidth in this manner. The commenter here is disciplining the quantity and theme of women's photographic practice as a thinly veiled means for expressing disdain at the perceived qualities of other people. Furthermore, the warning against the type of man this behaviour attracts displays the moral aspects to such discourse. In the women's photographic practice is connected with an unrestrained and dangerous sexuality, which is in need of restriction. Discipline can also be observed in the opposition between the binaries of good and bad practice, where galleries of worst selfies ever and top sexy selfies act as a coercive device to encourage acceptance of and adherence to certain norms of femininity. The implications of the bad selfie can also be observed in a range of recent examples, from selfies at serious places to the Obama funeral selfie. The shaming of these subjects relies upon the shared understanding that certain photographic behaviours imply a problematic subjectivity. But whereas selfies at funerals might well be a step too far, this connection between devalued practice and devalued subject is extended well beyond such contexts and used as a sweeping means of defining how certain groups, particularly young people and women, should behave. Besides restrictions placed on number and content, both the selfie and the duckface are targets of direct orders to stop altogether. Within public discourse, the duckface is understood above all else as a practice which must be stopped, its very character defined by the need to eradicate it. This almost automatic scorn demonstrates the function served by the duckface, namely enabling the expression of disdain for others, a wish to control them, and a claim to be their superiors. Describing and forbidding certain behaviours allows the speaker to attain a level of agency and status by demonstrating knowledge about such activities and then positioning themselves as being distinct from and better than them. The most extreme form of photographic regulation relates to threats of violence. One example features a woman with a piece of tape covering her mouth. She pulled the duck face, I gave her a ducked face. The speaker presents their actions as logical and warranted, where the problem that she represented has been fixed by intervening and forcibly modifying her body so that she cannot transgress any further. Other examples present the violent correction of duck-faced subjects as part of a game, as humour, or as an admired course of action in which a man is praised for taking it serious. Probably can't read that text there. Photography is therefore normalised as a practice which can prompt and legitimise violent reactions, and where subjects should expect correction if they do not follow the rules. This has a mind of its own. So this is my conclusion. The distinctions and hierarchies, therefore, within photography... Oh, there's a ghost in the machine. Yep, conclusion. So distinctions and hierarchies within photography support a wider context of discipline and prejudice, in which social divisions are expressed and maintained through cultural consumption. The discourse of the duckface exemplifies the coercive force regarding acceptable gender presentation, and disdain at the selfie's prevalence reveals a desire to promote certain online practices and subjects above others. But what seems particularly noteworthy here... I was going to say it's particularly noteworthy the fact that it's presented as fun and leisure.
Our next speaker is Dr. Ofer, who teaches at the NCJW Gender and Women's Studies program and the multidisciplinary program in the Humanities and Innovative University. His first book, entitled Erotic and Tragedy, Jewish Male Fantasies and the Masculine Revolution of Zionism, came out in March 2014. His talk today is titled The Quest for the Real, Erotic Selfies, In-Depth Interviews, and the Transformation of the Gay Pornographic Landscape After Web 2.0. Please join me in welcoming Dr.
I'm very excited to be here, and this is a very, you will see this is a very New York City-centric presentation, which happens to be. Oh. Sorry. This paper is part of a larger project that examines male sexualized online imagery in sociological and ethnographic lenses. I refrain from using the term pornography because I claim we live in a post-pornographic age. The post is, I guess, the same as in post-journalism. Is this running? Yeah.
We'll fix it. Go ahead.
Great, because I don't know how to fix that. The relationship between Huffington Post, that's a different post-pornography. I think so. I think it is. Yep.
Brilliant.
I just wanted to let you know about this Critical Pornographies conference that is upcoming at NYU. This is a New York-centered paper, and this particularly NYU-centered paper, as you will see in a minute. The relationship between Huffington Post and journalism applies structurally to the relationship between certain adult websites and for-profit and also not-for-profit products of sexual content. We know that life online dramatically disrupts the very existence of many industries, and also culturally it disrupts and restructures or reinvents modes of cultural production. Just as the Web 2 environment has intensified the blurring between professional and amateur content production, in the same vein it blurred the distinction between pornography and other forms of sexualized representation, and especially the growing prevalence of sexualized self-representation. Are you watching or listening?
Both.
Yeah. When we talk about current sexual materials circulating online, the term pornography itself distorts and misleads in several ways. One objection to the term has to do with its association with profit, embedded in the very term. This association becomes irrelevant in a space where activities are self-performed without pay. Secondly, whereas pornography is a modern capitalist form of for-profit publication of material generated for viewer sexual pleasure, and it functions as metaphorical crutches for the imaginationally impaired solitary onanist, in some cases, in a society that allows obscene material to circulate, it seems that the variety of sexually implicit and explicit expression and representation currently online do several completely other things. That is, before being commodified by Web 2 era predatory adult websites for pornographic purposes. It's still running. Yeah. So I brought these two. I don't know if these were sufficiently circulating in the US. The first one on the left is this baseball league player for Boston Red Sox, Grady Sizemore, which I was absolutely certain this was a April Fool's hoax, but it's a real selfie taken by him with his real identity. And then the Cock in the Sock social media campaign, you're probably familiar with that, but I wasn't. And I thought, wow, there's this wealth of guys with a cock in a sock for all of us to see. When I talk about predatory adult Web 2 era websites, I mean, this was well timed.
It's Microsoft. We'll blame them.
I meant primarily websites like Share Your BFs. This is just one of many that collect such images, either a video or still, and aggregate them for pay. And I stumbled across this. The whole reason for this project is when I first, but it's not showing. When I first came across Share Your BFs, I happened to find on the center part of the homepage of the website a nude, can you say erectile selfie? Of a student of mine at NYU. Wow. And it's pretty clear that he didn't know. I mean, he knew when he took the picture, but he didn't know the subsequent history or the future of that selfie. It's not there. It's no longer there, by the way, so you're not going to see the picture. But this is the site right now. As you can see, what they do is they collect these. There's a whole long list of selfies, other self-representations, including in video, of young men, and they make them available for pay online. Yeah. I started this project after stumbling upon this nude selfie of my student, and I began to wonder, why did he make that erectile selfie, and who posted it on an adult website? Does he know his selfie made at the dorm room in front of a mirror appears on an adult website? This is how this study began. In her book Net Porn, pioneer porn scholar Katrine Jacobs correctly argues that cyberspace has spawned large behavioral shifts in sexuality for everyday men and women. This fact aligns with other shifts in sexuality that have to do with what sociologist Zygmunt Bauman has termed liquid modernity and liquid love. So my first claim in this project...
I figured it out. You're good now.
Good, but it's not showing.
There you go. Next slide, I said.
Yeah, okay, good. So my first claim in this project is simple common sense. I claim that the human, social, and economic dynamics that characterize cyberspace since its invasion by commercial interests since the late 80s apply also to the realm of production and distribution of sexualized images. This includes the blurring between amateur and professional, leading to the right of the prosumer, you all know this, a complete reconfiguration of what is considered public and private, and a growing commercialization of amateur production, as we know in the Carr Benkler wager. What is the origin of work and images that we see online? Are they peer-produced or price incentivized? I mean, are these for-pay corporations that intervene in the amateur production of images, for example? It seems that the Web 2 environment fulfills two contradictory simultaneous vectors when it comes to sexualized representation and self-representation. The former web utopian promise of spontaneous UGC, made for a variety of purposes and posted online in a variety of social network websites, is then lifted by predatory for-profit websites who republish them as pornography. The best example are not only the two websites, but also websites that specialize in tracking down, collecting, and reposting sexualized amateur video clips and pictures for paying viewers. By the way, there are websites that post these images not for pay. For example, Share Your GF, as opposed to Share Your BF, which is not for profit Tumblr blog that aggregates such self-made sexual representations. I would also make the hypothesis that there are some, so that's a hypothesis, that there are some digital entrepreneurs out and about who create video chat situations on platforms such as Chat Roulette, where they pose as sexually interested for the sole purpose of recording, then selling the unsuspecting performer who, unbeknownst to him, is on his way to becoming an international sex icon, at least for a while. Apart from life online, we also need to consider the mainstreaming of sexualized images in all media and the rise of the legitimacy of eroticized subjectivities in the West. So I put this as to contrast it. You know, this is it is a Western phenomenon, at least in its scope. In sharp contrast to both Western and non-Western conservatisms, both in shock and dismay at this development. Same-sex modes of eroticized being have led and are still leading this intensification. So we are witnessing an explosion. Are you familiar with hump? Yeah. So we are witnessing an explosion of sexualized representation and self-representations in both mobile and pre-mobile cyberspace that are only marginally related to what used to be pornography. These are related to a variety of practices such as chatting, dating, sexting, online nude live shows and chats, personal blogging, and more. And to conclude, I would like to emphasize that I'm not so interested in questions of personal choice as to why some people feel comfortable posting erotic images of themselves. This is a long tradition, at least in the West, a long artistic tradition, as to why people would choose to represent themselves in a sexualized manner. I'm more interested in what makes this possible on such a wide scale in the West. I wanted the last slide to show a generation. Is it a generational interest? So that's also, for those of you who are familiar with this image, also coming from New York. Thank you.
media, the sociology of postmodernism, race, ethnic identity, and popular culture. She will now present her talk in defense of selfies, the conspicuous presumption of experience on social media. Join me, welcome.
Oh, that was right? Okay. So this guy, and then, oh, right. Okay. Yes, hi, I'm April. So first off, everybody knows what a selfie is by now, clearly, or we wouldn't be here. But just in case you don't, or you want an official definition, I am going to sort of go through mine and some that I took from various popular culture outlets. So my version is an image that a person takes of his or herself without the aid of an outside actor. A selfie can include a single individual, or it can be considered a selfie, a group selfie, or an USSI when it contains two or more individuals. Yes, hashtag USSI. And so also the first one taken from the Selfie Oxford Dictionary version is a photograph that one is taken of oneself, typically one taken with a smartphone or webcam, and uploaded to a social media website. And then one from Urban Dictionary, good old Urban Dictionary. A picture taken of yourself that is planned to be uploaded to Facebook, MySpace, or any other sort of social networking website. You can usually see the person's arm holding out the camera, in which case you can clearly tell that this person does not have any friends to take pictures of themselves, taken by themselves. A selfie is usually accompanied by a kissy face, or the individual looking into a direction that is not towards the camera. Oh, okay, so how did this whole thing start? So it's not like we just started taking selfies. We've been taking them for at least a decade, starting sort of with the MySpace pic. I'm sure you guys all remember, we all had a MySpace, at least I had a MySpace, and I did the MySpace pic, I'm guilty. And then sort of when we migrated over to Facebook, front-facing cameras encouraged higher quality selfies, and it was also just easier to take one because you could just, use your iPhone or whatever phone that you had and just snap one. So where are we now? In 2013, selfie was the Oxford Dictionary Word of the Year. And the selection committee lists among their criteria for choosing the word of the year demonstrated prominence over the preceding year or so. Then the Selfie Olympics started concurrent with the actual Olympics to find the world's most daring selfie takers. And actually some of the pictures that Anne used were some of the ones that I was seeing when I was following the Selfie Olympics trends during the actual Olympics. And I didn't actually get to watch the Olympics, but I got to see the Selfie Olympics on Twitter. And yeah, some of them are super wild. And then Pew Research Center just recently released a study that says 55% of millennials have posted a selfie on a social media platform. So now that we're all up to speed, this is Selfie Bingo. And I borrowed this from a colleague, and these are sort of a lot of the attitudes. That's your website? That's awesome. I didn't know that. So great. And so it's an Essie. Yes, please someone capture the Essie moment. And so I'm sure everyone feels at least one of these ways about selfies. And several of my participants that I interviewed, and I'll talk about it in a few minutes, said a lot of these things. Selfies are narcissistic. I don't like to take selfies. Selfies make me mad. I hate them. I hate the word selfie. That's a great one. Stop taking selfies. I hate selfies. And so my research question is, why do we take them? Well, that's sort of what the research question became, I guess I should say. And in order to understand sort of why people use social media, I interviewed 32 participants in New York and Texas about their social media habits. I asked each participant about 30 questions in the form of a semi-structured interview that lasted about 15 to 45 minutes. And there's several different questions, not just about selfies, about Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. People talked about Foursquare, Reddit, you name it, people brought it up. But the questions that I'm going to focus on for this presentation is, why do you take selfies? When do you take selfies? And how do you feel when people like or favorite your selfies? And so, oh, just kidding. I use the grounded theory approach in this because I had all of these interviews and lots of patterns that kept emerging. And so in my implementation of that, I developed the theory of conspicuous presumption. And I'll get into exactly what that term means in a bit. But first, I want to sort of talk about presumers and what presumption is. And so the concept of the presumer, originally coined by Alvin Toffler, has been expanded on by George Ritzer and his colleagues, Jorgensen and Ray. And they convincingly argue that the dichotomized theorization of the terms production and consumption is exclusionary and restrictive. Instead, they argue, and I agree, that production and consumption have always existed along a continuum. They always coexist together, and that one activity, say production, always includes to some degree a bit of the other. And so they're kind of using it in the terms of economics, but it can also be used in ways of social media platforms, and we do this presumption thing sort of on an everyday basis in what Pine and Gilmore call the experience economy. And so I build on Ritzer and his colleagues, as well as Pine and Gilmore, by adding that millennials presume conspicuously in the experience economy because, as David Reisman theorized, other directed individuals are heavily influenced by the opinions of their peers. So conspicuous presumption is the act of producing and consuming constructed experiences with the explicit intent of allowing others to share in those experiences. So what I found were that there were different patterns in the way that people engage in this behavior and the way that they engage with social media. And one of the trends that I focused on is by race. And so there were distinct differences in the way that Black, Latino, and white participants talked about, thought about, and engaged in selfie taking. And so this is an overview of my sample. And here is the number of selfies that they told me that they had. And then this is the race. And just looking at this, you can already tell 0 Black participants said that they had 0 selfies, which I think is huge just on its own. Out of the entire 32, the 4 that said that they didn't have any selfies at all, 2 were white, 1 was Latino, and 1 was Asian. And then as you get down further and you look at this like 800 to 1,000 group, that's no one but Black in this column, and then the innumerable amount, Blacks and Latinos. And so I'm going to talk about sort of their responses and why they found that was. So what I found was that everyone conceptualized taking selfies as an act of narcissism. The difference is that for Blacks and Latinos, selfie taking was constructed and talked about as a positive form of narcissism. Participants responded that they posted selfies when they felt good about themselves and wanted to share that with people, or they were having a moment that they wanted others to experience. And on the other hand, white participants talked about taking selfies as something that was to be seen as a negative experience. On average, white users reported taking far fewer selfies than Blacks and Latinos. And and so one possible explanation for these differences, just sort of going through the literature, I wanted to figure out what it was that, why this construction of narcissism was sort of different. And I found that this is sort of highlighted by the Black-white health paradox, which I know it seems like a jump, but basically the paradox is, researchers have found that despite Blacks having shorter lives due to ongoing environmental stressors of racism, they live happier, more fulfilling lives because narcissism acts as a positive defense against racism and discrimination. And this is opposed to the classic way that we think about narcissism as something that leads to more negative displays in life. But even considering these differences, everyone engages in some type of narcissism when taking selfies because doing so engages in the experience economy. The impactful difference is the way that people talk about them. So even when white participants express reluctance for taking selfies, everyone expressed gratification when they receive positive feedback from their peers, affirming Reisman's theory again that other directed persons crave that affirmation. And so now I'm going to read some of the responses because that's the best part. We all want to hear from the selfie takers. So here are a few responses from Black and Latino respondents in response to the question about how many selfies do you currently have posted on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook. At Pink Poppy, which these have all been recoded. I made these names up. You will not be able to find these people on Twitter because they don't exist by these names. And so, at Pink Poppy, oh my God, I'm like the queen of selfies. I've been taking selfies my whole life. I mean, God. I was like, oh my God, in defense of selfies. I look so good right now and everyone needs to know it. In response to the same question, a makeup artist says, oh my gosh, does it count if it's like the same one on all of them? So like literally all of my like selfies, I don't post all my selfies on Facebook, but all my profile pictures are selfies. But I'm going to say and be really comfortable with this, just say like 1,000. I have a lot of selfies. And then in response to the question, how do you feel when individuals like or favorite these selfies? At MA Sparkle says, I mean, it's cool. I mean, it's not like going to decide how I feel about myself, but I'm glad you like it, motherfucker. Yeah. Also a Black respondent. And so here are a few responses from white participants. In response to the question, how do you feel when individuals like or favorite these images? At Cat Lady says, it's kind of flattering, just kind of flattering. I don't think I took it much deeper than that. I guess it's better than like a picture of where I am or food or something, but it's not like something that would make me start doing selfies all the time. And at Grievances says, I guess it feels good. Yeah, I mean, I think if you're posting selfies, there's definitely a vain quality there. Even if you're not necessarily a vain person, there's definitely a vain there. So I think if you post them, you definitely want people to like them. And so in addition to just talking about an affinity or dislike of taking selfies, people also discuss the practice of counting their likes, which I didn't realize that I did until I started doing the study, and I was like, oh, I totally do that too. So participants from all racial backgrounds mentioned counting their likes. Even when they said that they did not like taking selfies, they still counted how many likes a picture received on Instagram or Facebook. Some participants even mentioned taking pictures down and reposting them at a later time when they perceived they could get more likes. So here's an example from a Black respondent. Moldate says, my fewest one is probably like 31 likes, but I've learned like if you post in the morning, you're not going to get as much likes. And so it depends on the certain time of day that you post the picture. I don't remember what my lowest one is, like what it is of. It's probably like 30 though. And here is an example from a white respondent. At Follow Me says, it makes you feel good, like people trying to say I look good or something. I try to put pictures up to get lots of likes because it's like I see some people that put pictures up there that are so stupid, like a shoe, and they'll get like 75 likes or something. And I'll put pictures up of me and my friends and I'll get like 15. But like usually if I get like 30 or something, I'm pretty stoked about that. And so in conclusion, all of these practices illuminate how people conspicuously presume experiences and specifically the practice of counting the likes. Users want to know that others are presuming the same types of experiences as they are. And one of the limitations that I wanted to talk about and where I kind of want to go with the research in the future is that I didn't really get to parse out gender as much as I would like to, since there's a lot of self-selection in the way that I contacted participants and they had to opt in, obviously. I had more females opt in than males, and so I didn't feel like I could make any generalizations about gender at this point, but that's something that I'm going to do in the next phase of my project, which I'm continuing for the dissertation. So I'm planning on interviewing 70 more individuals and sort of being able to dive deeper into the gender part. But thank you.
Unfortunately, the final speaker will be Molly Crabapple, who is an artist and journalist living in New York. She's a columnist for Vice and has written for the New York Times, The Guardian, Paris Review, Newsweek, and CNN, and was shortlisted for the Frontline Print Journalism Award for her report on Guantanamo Bay. She's working on a book for her columns entitled Drawing Blood.
Thank you so much. You're welcome. Where are you?
He's joining me.
No.
Hey guys! Hey guys, so before I go into my speech, I just have to say I'm not a fancy academic like my other brilliant presenters. In fact, I never even graduated school, so bear with me. Jihad is the best tourism. A young Dutch citizen who calls himself Chechclear posted on his Tumblr. He was riding a camel, grinning, his face filtered into an Instagram haze like pre-made nostalgia. Chechclear is one of an estimated 1,700 Europeans fighting in Syria. He was once part of the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, or ISIS, which al-Qaeda officially disowned for being too brutal. But he now fights with an unspecified fundamentalist brigade. He seems to be having the time of his life, and he documents his adventure for adoring fans across several social media platforms. That's his Tumblr. Chechclear loves selfies. Selfies are often thought of as female. Girls are the ones who take selfies, of course. Specifically, girls who are trying to look hot, and anything girls do is stupid. Selfies are supposed to stand in for superficiality, for vanity, for everything that is wrong with kids these days. Websites like Jezebel agonize over whether selfies are feminist. Newspapers concern troll. Are people taking selfies at funerals? Are selfies spreading head lice amongst adolescent girls? Doesn't the very existence of selfies show how effete we are, how superficial, how lame, how first world? And by we, the media usually means women. There's Chechclear, by the way. What newspapers don't understand is that even before the first phone flipped its camera to face inwards, selfies were chronicling every aspect of life. Everyone's selfies, no matter how supposedly serious they are, and no matter how supposedly serious the atmosphere they're currently in is. Cops take selfies. People who have just been arrested and are sweating it out in a police van take selfies. People living in war zones take selfies. European jihadi fighters take selfies. There is no wall of gravitas a selfie cannot cross. Selfies are ghosts in the machine, both immortal and ephemeral. Selfies show that we are here, and selfies show who we want to be. But if Europeans like Chechclear are using selfies to show them living out Call of Duty fantasies, they do it at the expense of Syrian lives. In the territory in Syria's north, ISIS is imposing its harsh interpretation of Sharia law with torture and beheadings. Its Western fighters are posing in the ruins. In Syria, the battle for territory waged on the ground is matched by a battle for meaning waged online. Syria may be the first war that is entirely viewable online from every single side. Civilians in both rebel and regime areas take photos of the shells raining down on them, of their relatives dying, of bystanders being dragged away by the police or by rebels at checkpoints. To please their private donors, rebel brigades post videos of battles online. Syrian-American writer Lina Sergi Attar tweeted that she never imagined she would see so many friends who she was familiar with on Skype being killed on YouTube. In previous wars, many thought that if the world could just see what was happening, they would feel empathy. But this is not the case. Whether they're Kurds carving out an independent state, revolutionaries, or TEDx organizers sympathetic to Assad, Syrians use Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook to tell their stories. It's a contested ground, filled with both propaganda and truth. Posting can be deadly. Both the Assad regime and fundamentalist fighters target citizen journalists. Each Friday, the town of Crabapple unfurls hand-painted revolutionary banners. Written in English, full of pop culture and black wit, they're made to go viral. They're visual bombs forcing the internet, and by extension the world, to recognize that they are human. And on the internet, humanity often means that you speak the language of the West. After George Zimmerman was acquitted of murdering Trayvon Martin, a Crabapple banner read, "Martin family. The Syrians are the best who know what it's like to lose loved ones to immune criminals." Later, another banner portrayed ISIS as a Geiger-esque alien. For those who oppose either Assad or fundamentalist fighters, showing your face can be deadly. When activists do show their faces in selfies, it's a show of courage. They're saying, "I'm not afraid. Don't be afraid either." Well, the Syrian state news agency's English language Twitter account blithely tweets about soccer matches. Other parts of social media make the truth of Assad's war impossible to conceal. Syrian Twitter accounts show an Ouroboros of horror. Kids dead from bombing, buildings flattened, starving men slaughtering a lion at the Damascus Zoo. People in war zones take selfies to assert their suffering and their existence in a world that would deny it. Concerned Westerners respond with their own selfies, with the hashtag with Syria written on their hands. But while Syrians use social media to expose war crimes, Chechklir and his fellow Westerners often use it to show off. Vice journalist Aris Roussenos published photos of British jihadis posing with their guns aloft like Rambo, silhouetted against the setting sun. The personal Facebook pages Roussenos discovered bragged about a 5-star jihad with swimming pools, chocolate, and weapons training in luxury villas. These photos of guns and ideal vacation locations are reminiscent of the genre of haul videos on YouTube. In these videos, teenage girls display what they've bought in a shopping spree, laying out heels, earrings, and makeup. In both cases, the goal is, look what I have. Other photos show young men trying their hardest to look fearsome. This is a photo posted of a guy doing a foot bath in bullets. At the same time, they realize it's a bit of a joke. I've had ISIS fighters Twitter me gifs of Freddy Krueger, tweeting, "Molly, we're gonna kill you." I would just write back, LOL. Which, by the way, if you ever get rape and death threats on Twitter, which I do, LOL is the best response to all of them. Western governments, ever up for a racist or Islamophobic panic, are happy to oblige by getting scared. Governments are less worried about the Syrians their citizens murder while on holiday, and more about the prospect of imaginary terror attacks when these citizens come back home. In Britain, police recently made an appeal to Muslim women to spy on their male relatives and report them if they're planning to fight in Syria. Muazzin Beg, a former Guantanamo detainee and current human rights campaigner, is currently in jail for traveling to Syria and embedding with an Islamist brigade. It's something many white journalists have done, including many of my friends, but government's rules for Muslims are different. The social media bragging of Western jihadis abroad is manipulated by racist governments to call for the surveillance of Muslim communities at home. When Western jihadis post their selfies, they're saying they're tough motherfuckers, but they're also burning their bridges. In Western countries, these selfies can mean arrest. They are the ultimate way of saying, look, Mom, this isn't a phase. A British jihadi account, Riyad al-Tawhid, made this macro of a bloody pistol, reading, "You only die once, so why not make it a martyrdom?" While some of Riyad al-Tawhid's lines refer to religious teachings, most of them are fluffy internet culture spat back on itself. They have the can-do feel of a Fitspiration Tumblr. But instead of thigh gaps, the aspiration is guns. Some of the quotes are taken straight off of Pinterest. In the end, we only regret the chances we didn't take. I'm not telling you it's going to be easy, but I'm telling you it's going to be worth it. Unsurprisingly, Riyad al-Tawhid is absolutely beloved by the Daily Mail, who have written many articles about them. In a media which has less and less budget or interest to send reporters abroad to do real reporting, easily denounceable memes are a godsend. Before he was booted off of Instagram for posting photos of corpses, Chechklir pouted for the camera like a fashion blogger, posting selfies of his luxuriant facial hair with the hashtags beardlife and alpha male. Women argued over the appropriateness of complimenting him in the comments. Western jihadis in Syria also really like cats. Like Chechklir, Abu Laith has an eye for photography. His frontline Tumblr is lovely with images of war's dusty glamour, tanks, big skies, fighters staring manfully into the horizon. But the aesthetic might look similar to something you're familiar with. This is recruitment for the Marines. We both like our killing machines silhouetted against sunsets, our fighters staring manfully into the horizon. In Syria or suburban Idaho, war is beautiful, as long as you stand far enough away. Fighters the world over repeat war movie imagery in real-life wars, posting it online to make war movies of their own lives. But as academic Zeynep Tufakci says, bits are different than atoms. Abu Laith's war photos live forever. Abu Laith was shot dead during the war. Like many well-meaning Westerners, ISIS members love to cuddle refugee children. It's a mirror image of the well-meaning white ladies hugging orphans in India and Africa, and then later posting their photos on the Facebook. That's Liz Jones from the Daily Mail. In both cases, the children look less than enthused. And the pictures are a smiling counterpart to the other and most famous type of jihadi selfie, which is them holding a severed head. If Western fighters come to Syria to topple Assad, they do not have much regard for the original revolution started by actual Syrians. The fundamentalist brigades they fight with use methods similar to the dictator they want to overthrow. In December, Amnesty International released a report on conditions in ISIS jails. Children as young as 8 were beaten with generator belts, prisoners were tortured with electric shocks, and forced to guess the weights of freshly severed heads. Not satisfied with beheading people, ISIS even tweeted a picture of one of their fighters chopping down a 150-year-old oak tree that they accused villagers of worshipping. A Syrian civil society activist who was lashed by a masked man was told, "We don't recognize anything called a revolution. That was a revolution for non-believers. We are here to set up an Islamic State." I frankly despise every non-Syrian who comes to fight in Syria, whether they are on the regime side or the opposition side. It's our revolution against injustice by the regime. It's not a jihad. Abdul Qadir Hariri, a 25-year-old English literature graduate in Raqqa, told me via email. Meanwhile, Abu Kaka, a British ISIS fighter, tweeted, "All women in Raqqa now wear face veils. Progress from God." Ooh. The US government realizes the popularity of internets amongst fundamentalists, probably because internets are popular amongst everyone. The Department of Defense has spent several hundreds of thousands of dollars creating a Twitter account, Think Again, Turn Away, which trolls fundamentalist fighters who post in English. It's kind of like Just Say No for religiously motivated warfare. It tells them using a hashtag, "Guys, knock that off." It also only posts Monday through Friday, 9 to 5 during Washington hours, when most people in the Middle East would be asleep. K.A., a Syrian student in the United Kingdom, maintains close ties with his relatives in Aleppo and Idlib. He told me that his uncle had opened an internet cafe in his house to make extra money. But members of ISIS took it over, selling his routers in Turkey and forcing him from his home so they could use it as a base. According to K.A., Westerners often come to Syria to fight on, quote, an adrenaline-filled holiday. The common habit of Western citizens who have never experienced real armed combat is to lurk around the Syrian-Turkish border and immediately run back to Turkey as soon as anything escalates, K.A. told me over email. While they're still in Syria, they walk around in cities with Kalashnikovs to assert their dominance as they enjoy the privileges of being in a country with a huge power vacuum and a population of starving and desperate people. In Iraq, the US Army made it a habit of rolling through areas they had just bombed and giving kids candy. As the desperate 5-year-olds scuttled for the sweets, an army propaganda photographer would snap photos that would later be posted late to show that we were winning hearts and minds. ISIS uses the same tactic for Instagram videos. What matters is not meat space, which is ephemeral. What matters is a photo op. In a war zone, people die quickly. Photos last. Death is the final performance. When a fighter dies, his comrades snap a photo. In death, your lips relax into a slight smile. These martyr photos are framed like Instagram self-portraits, but corpses have no selves. The dead exist for the projections of the living. See how beautiful they are, these photos ask. How righteous, be like them. The smiles for this final selfie are reimagined as those of martyrs seeing paradise. Glock 19, a British citizen fighting in Syria, wrote in his Twitter bio, "The jihad doesn't belong to any one group, so what's stopping you?" In December, he complained that locals wouldn't say hello to him and overcharged foreign fighters at shops. Worse, some men preferred to stay with their families in refugee camps instead of taking up arms with his group. "I never came here for these ungrateful Syrians," he tweeted. "After the jihad finishes here, if I am alive, I'll go to another country and continue jihad. Jihad never stops." It's not surprising that Western fundamentalist fighters use social media. In 2014, we all perform for the network. We all choose a filter, pout fetchingly, and take starring roles in the movies that we make of our lives. What is surprising is that, despite their rejection of the West, These fighters see Syria the same way Westerners have always seen the Middle East. It is an exotic backdrop for their authority, their adventures, and their violence. To them, the desires of Syrians matter little. As Westerners, they're used to mattering most. Thank you.
So it seems that all of your brilliant talks, when they're put together, they show how the selfie, whether it's a Duckface or an erotic image, or as, I don't know what to say about hashtag grievances, really, but whatever he or she were posting, it seems that you look at the selfies as what constitutes or preserves an existing disciplinarity or existing normative structures instead of breaking through them or instead of changing them. Whether it's, as you talk about, the self-orientalist image of the jihadi or the erotic images of men posted on, how did you call it, post-pornography websites?
Yeah.
Or through the Duckface, which is a wonderful example of maintaining those norms. And I'm wondering if you guys thought a little bit about a possibility of breaking through the selfies or using the selfies and using those existing normative structures in order to reframe, or if you see examples of how we can reframe those positions.
I definitely think that there's the potential to do that. I also think that it would be difficult, but in the nature of us being producers and consumers, I think that we can do it. It's just a matter of shifting of mindset, which is traditionally not easy to come by.
Have you encountered any examples for that?
I mean, not off the top of my head that I can think of. Not off the top of my head.
I guess in my example, I look less at people who actually take selfies themselves, and I look more at people who talk about people who take selfies. So I would probably suggest as a sort of countermeasure to these, the desire to reduce, to shut down meaning and to contain it within certain, limitations and to serve certain purposes, is to just keep taking selfies, is to just keep doing it and just keep doing it, because otherwise it does become what the dominant narrative makes it into. So just keep doing it. Now.
We can take questions from the audience. I'm sure there are. So there's a microphone circulating.
Hi. Okay.
The mic is for the live stream.
Yeah. All right. So I have a question for I might butcher your name. Ofer?
Ofer, yeah.
I asked it via Twitter as well, but I was wondering, showing us the subjects of share my BF, share my GF, is that further re-victimizing the subjects? And also, someone noted in the room that you maybe unintentionally showed the full figure of share my GF, but cropped the pictures on share my BF. So I was just wondering if that's just showing us these images is further victimizing them.
Oh, if showing the images for further victimizing them. Well, this is an academic venue, so we're trying to analyze what they're doing and what is happening on those websites. Yeah, I think it's pretty cynical that they even use the word sharing, which is not actually what they're doing. They're not. There's nothing to be shared here. This is a commercial. This is a commercial enterprise. So. Yeah.
More questions? We can also, yeah.
Hey, so I loved all of the presentations, but my general wheelhouse is race, and so I wanted to ask both April and Molly. Both of you talked a little bit about commentary. One, that narcissism is kind of a defense against racism, which I'd love for you to build out a little bit in terms of this positive defense. And Molly as well, in terms of looking at Western jihadis and their use of social media and vanity as it kind of impacts Muslim communities and other profile communities here in the States and how those things work. I'd love to hear two of you expand more on both of those points.
So basically, with the narcissism, so in the paper, I think it's Panek et al. They do a narcissism scale, and they have like 8 different ways of thinking about narcissism, and the things that they would say, I would group them into that scale, and generally they're the more positive types of things. I don't remember exactly what they are, but I think the paper is 2011 if you want to look it up. And generally it was just from what they were saying would be things like, oh yeah, I don't feel bad about taking them, or I take them when I feel like I look really good. And that in conjunction with, well, if you take 800 of them, then you must feel like you look really good all the time. And so I feel like that is a very healthy sense of who I am, and I'm not afraid to show you that this is what I can do. And in fact, I had one participant who said, I take them and I post them to show like I'm doing this, like on my own, I'm killing it, and this is actually a black male. He was like, I like to show that I am here and I'm doing what I want to do. And so, whereas generally the white participants would say things like, oh, I don't really like selfies, or I'm not really comfortable with them, I hate them, or would justify sort of why they were taking them. So I just went on a road trip, that's why I have so many. I usually don't have this many, so that was sort of where that was coming from.
In terms of how this sort of imagery is being used to further surveil and criminalize Muslim communities, especially in the US and Britain, so the US and Britain are already incredibly racist against Muslim communities, and the play that these sort of postings, like the Riyadh al-Tawheed macros, have gotten in the press is huge. And so it's being used, especially in Britain, as justification to further criminalize Muslims, especially Muslims who might want to travel to Syria, which might have nothing to do with fighting at all. A lot of doctors have traveled to Syria, a lot of aid workers. There's been an incredible amount of extremely noble and useful aid done by Muslim communities in Syria. And the people who do that are in danger of being criminalized because of these young guys posting asinine things on social media. And basically, these sort of images are being used by the government to justify civil rights abuses, especially against Muslims, and to feed a sort of racist hysteria.
Oh, there's 2 questions in the back.
I only saw your presentation, Molly, but it was fantastic.
Thank you.
Nobody says the phrase severed heads quite as well as you do. Congratulations on that. But I think it was amazing like how similar the aesthetics of like the imagery shared by jihadis are to, I mean, this is obviously the takeaway, to those shared by anybody else. And it just makes me wonder about like whether at this point in history there's like, you know, we've reached a point where there's no ideology and aesthetics because people can have absolutely competing ideologies and almost exactly the same aesthetic. Or maybe we all have the same ideology, which is like, let's have constant war all the time.
Yeah.
Or maybe there's a separate aesthetic which is going on when people aren't communicating outwards. So the selfie is about communicating outwards. Maybe there's like a Snapchat jihadi aesthetic, which is completely different. Do you have any speculation or insight on that?
I was recently in Istanbul interviewing people about the aftermath of Occupy Gezi, and I spoke to a veteran leftist who had been involved with a very radical leftist group, and he had been imprisoned, and he had seen everything. And he was telling me that when he was a young man at protests, they looked terrible, but now they looked great. And the reason that he said that was that everyone's seen The Matrix, and they've seen over and over again imageries of what protests should look like, and so they have all the right clothing, they know how to pose, and that while they're at the protests, they're thinking both of their actions in that moment and their actions as projected outwards to the network, and how that can mirror things they've already seen. I think that there is, thanks to mass culture, a universal aesthetic of war and protest. And people who are attracted to war, and they might be attracted to war for all sorts of different reasons, all sorts of different ideologies, legitimate, illegitimate, tap into this universal war aesthetic, and they try to make themselves actors inside it.
Should we take a question from, how are we doing in our hashtag? Okay. So we have another question in the back there. I can ask you tons of questions for that. We're never leaving.
Well, that was just fascinating. And as I was listening to the first and second part, I realized the promotional value of selfie may be one underlying question here, because, I mean, it's feminized in some sense because women are supposed to also expected to promote themselves and package themselves online in some particular ways. And the jihadi selfie seems to be, along with YouTube videos, a way in which these people fundraise from the Gulf. There's this whole, it's very much their pitch. So if somebody was asking on the hashtag stream, is there a Snapchat jihadi selfie market? Maybe not. I mean, maybe that just defeats the purpose. So how do we put the selfie, how do we think of the selfie as a promotional product, as something maybe that's uniting a lot of the themes that are coming up from various populations that are structured to promote themselves for different reasons?
No, it's a very, very valid and important point. I mean, one of the criticisms of selfies is that you're bragging, right? That you're saying, look how awesome my life is, your life sucks. And that you could be bragging about, the really cool dress you have or the really great car you have, or you could be bragging about your ideological commitment and purity and how square your jaw looks while you're off, killing people in a foreign land. But a fundamental way that selfies have been seen, even though I do not think it's selfies' primary or only purpose, is to show off. And showing off, part of the goal of that is to inspire envy, so other people are like, wow, I wish I was doing something as masculine as important as these guys are.
Can I jump in?
Yes, jump
in.
Yeah,
I think that in sexual selfies or in sexual self-representation, the reverse thing happens, where men would be much less perturbed to promote themselves sexually. And come back to your question, I didn't pick up the criticism that you raised, that only later. Then when women are sexually exposed, they would personally view it completely differently than young men or men who would find the afterlife of their sexual self-representation. So they might pretend that it's just promoting their masculinity, whereas a young woman's response could be devastation, I presume.
Oh yes, I'm going to agree with you, because part of my other research is really light-hearted, because I look at involuntary pornography, otherwise known as revenge porn. And
yeah, exactly.
Their promotion is almost by proxy, because you share a photograph of your partner against their will as a means of promoting yourself and your power over them, because the possession of the image and the ability to use it to create harm and to use shame is a way of promoting yourself without even showing yourself. So it sort of turns it on its head a little bit there.
There was a question for you? Okay. More questions?
I think we're past time.
Oh.
Sorry, that's
So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.